Eastern Noontime Pacific, I'm Todd Vanderheyden. Good to have you with us from across the country on this Wednesday afternoon. Another chapter in the drawn-out extradition case of Meng Wanzhou today, a big one. A judge in British Columbia ruling against the Huawei executive, meaning the extradition case against her will continue. The case has certainly hurt Canada-China relations, seeing Wanzhou's arrest back on Canadian soil in December of 2018 over fraud allegations. Experts say the ruling could carry further consequences as well for several Canadians. The two Michaels, Michael Kovrig, Michael Spavor, who are being held in China against their will. The host of Power Play, Evan Solomon, is standing by in Ottawa with more on the implications of this. Evan, what do you think this is going to mean now?
Retaliation, no question about it. China widely was pushing Canada to come to a different decision. The problem is China knows that we have an independent judiciary. They just pretend not to because they don't, in their system, respect an independent judiciary. China had warned Canada, you better throw this out. But once the judge found that double criminality occurred, which means the charge in the United States would also be a crime here in Canada, this becomes political now. We've already seen two Canadians, Michael Spavor and Michael Kovrig, who were plucked off the streets, and Canada regards this as a retaliation. There's no justification for it. They've been thrown in prison. Their conditions, brutal by any UN standard, lights on 24 hours a day. They rarely get access to consular services, no lawyers there, their reading glasses taken away. It's close to, if not regarded as torture. Meng Wanzhou is held in a $10 million mansion. The Chinese now have already, we should be concerned about if you're an exporter for canola, pork, beef, if you're doing business in China, if you're traveling to China, this is worrisome. And Todd, let me just read you something. Global Times is a newspaper that publishes essentially from the Chinese Communist Party. And listen to, this is an indication of China's reaction. Quote, Canada has completely surrendered its self-proclaimed judicial and diplomatic independence to U.S. bullying and foreshadows the worst ever China-Canada ties. This has made Canada, quote, a pathetic clown and a scapegoat in the fight between China and the U.S. So, yes, we are stuck between these two superpowers. We're grist in the mill, but you can expect already tense relationships with China to deteriorate. And then, Todd, the next shoe to drop, what will Canada do on allowing Huawei to be part of Canada's 5G network? The U.S. is saying, don't let them happen. The 5G, the Five Eyes community, the UK, New Zealand, Australia, Canada, and the United States, there's real pressure to not let Huawei into the 5G. And now that this relationship has deteriorated, it will be impossible to separate the Huawei decision on 5G from this decision, from the independent decision of this judge that China may not respect on Meng Wanzhou. So this is probably the most tense and maybe the lowest you have ever seen Canada-China relations.
Hey, Evan, what do you think happens to those two Canadian men held against their will for 18 months now? Michael Kovrig, Michael Spavor, what's going to happen?
I'd say their supporters and Canadians should be deeply concerned about it. They are suffering immensely right now. The Chinese Canada regards this as a quid pro quo, and I would be deeply concerned for their safety and what is happening for them. Remember, the charges that they're on, the conviction rate is like 99.5%. in China. It could be very dangerous for them right now, and we'll have to see the reaction from the Canadian government. Look at the crackdown happening in Hong Kong right now. The Chinese government, under the COVID cover of darkness, is cracking down on protesters. Canada and Canadian citizens in prison would be pragmatic to be deeply concerned.
So seeing this, the Chinese, Evan, as an opportunity to move against pro-democracy protesters in Hong Kong and I guess elsewhere as well, as the world is distracted by COVID-19. But now this case comes to light, and you're saying that we're going to feel some economic pain as well.
China clearly is not adverse to using any pressure necessary. And this is where Canada, as a middle power between the two super giants, China and the United States, has to decide what its position is. And its position thus far has been, we've got to respect our extradition treaties. We know the U.S. and China are in their own global war, and we know that we're a pawn in there. But it's a painful position to be in. Canada's got to make sure that the international community does not allow any superpower to bully outside of the rule of law. And that's why international treaties, extradition treaties, have to be respected, because if they're not, you'll see the pressure we get from a country like China to simply undermine it.
Is there anything the Prime Minister can do realistically here, Evan, to try and get those men freed?
Well, he can make the case, and we'll have to see what the United States now says. There should be an international pressure to have that. We just don't want people who can be plucked off the streets like that. But do we have any leverage? No, we just don't have a lot of leverage against China. The Chinese believe they have lots more leverage against us because, they're we're price takers. They're the price makers. They're the people that we're exporting to. And so they have an enormous amount of power. But again, we have to insist that this is an independent judicial decision. The Chinese don't respect that. But Canada, again, this could eventually fall into the laps of the justice minister to make another decision. I just don't see in the wake of a court decision like this that the justice minister could say, you know what, we're going to send her back anyway. I just think that the justice minister is going to have an arm's length decision on this and let Meng Wanzhou, who's going to have a long process ahead of her. There's going to be a long legal process and potentially a short political process as the pressure and economic retaliation may happen quickly. So we should expect that.
CTV's Evan Solomon in Ottawa, host of Power Play and Question Period. Thank you, Evan.
Thanks, Todd.